welcome to the first episode of History 2.0, and today we will be talking about Laura Ingalls Wilder. Her full name is Laura Elizabeth Ingalls Wilder. She was born on February 7th, 1887 in Pepin County, Wisconsin to Charles Philip Ingalls and Caroline Lake Quinner Holbrook Ingalls. Laura's mother, Caroline, her maiden name was Caroline Lake Quinner, but was later changed to Holbrook due to her mother getting remarried. Caroline was born on December 8th, 1839, 15 miles west of Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, in the town of Brookfield. She was the fifth of 8 children. Martha was born in 1821. Joseph was born in 1823. Henry was born in 1824. Thomas was born in 1827. Jane was born in 1830. And Eliza was born in 1832. And Lottie, her youngest sister, was born in 1846. Martha, her oldest sibling, died at the age of 2 from scarlet fever, complications from it. In 1844, when Caroline was 5 years old, her father died in a shipwreck. He was the first mate of a cargo ship, and then 3 years later, on August 15th, 1848, her mother remarried Frederick Holbrook, and they later had her youngest sibling, Lottie Holbrook. And at the age of 16, Caroline began teaching school in Concord, Wisconsin, where she met her husband, Charles Philip Ingalls. He was a neighbor of hers for the family that she was staying at. And then they married on February 1st of 1860 when she was 21 and he was 24. Charles Philip Ingalls was born January 10th, 1836 in Cuba, New York. His parents were Lansford Whitting Ingalls and Laura Louise Colby Ingalls. He was the fourth of 9 children. Peter Ingalls was born in 1830. Lansford James Ingalls was born in 1832. Ruby Celestia Ingalls was born in 1834. Charles was born in 1836. George Whitting Ingalls was born in 1837. Hiram Lamel Ingalls was born in 1838. And Laura Ladocia Ingalls was born in 1839. And Polly Melona Ingalls was born in 1840. And he had a young brother that was born and died at birth in 1842, and he farmed with his father until he moved to Wisconsin to find a new life, and there he met and married his wife, Caroline Quinner Holbrook. The Ingalls home in Pepin became the setting for Laura's first book, Little House in the Big Woods, in 1932. She was the second of 5 children. Her older sister, Mary, and she had 2 younger siblings, actually 3. Caroline Celestia, who they called Carrie in the books. Charles Frederick, he was born, but he died in infancy. He had unspecified sickness. And Grace Pearl Ingalls Wilder's birth site is commemorated by a replica of the log cabin that her father built in the Little House Wayside in Pepin. Ingalls, she was a descendant of the Delano family, the ancestral family of the U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. One paternal ancestor, Edmund Ingalls from Skirbeck, Lincolnshire, England, immigrated to America and settled in Massachusetts. And then Laura was the 7th granddaughter of the Mayflower passenger Richard Warren. She was a 3rd cousin once removed of the U.S. President's Civil War General Ulysses S. Grant. In her early life, when she was 2 years old, Ingalls moved with her family to Wisconsin in 1869. After stopping in Rossville, Missouri, they settled in the Indian country of Kansas. Modern day, that would be near Independence. Her younger sister Carrie was born in Independence in August of 1870, and they moved again not long before they moved again. According to her, her father Charles had been told that the location would be open to white settlers, but when they arrived, this was not the case. They had no legal right to occupy their homestead because it was on the Osage Indian Reservation. They had begun to farm when they heard rumors that the settlers would be evicted, so they decided they would leave. They left in the spring of 1871. Although in her novel On the Little House on the Prairie and her Pioneer Girl memoir, Ingalls portrayed their departure as being prompted by rumors of eviction, she also noted that her parents needed to recover their Wisconsin land because the buyer had not paid the mortgage. The Ingalls family went back to Wisconsin, where they lived for the next 3 years, and those experiences formed the basis for her novel, Little House in the Big Woods, 1932, and the beginning of the book Little House on the Prairie in 1935, and then later the book On the Banks of Plum Creek in 1939. The third volume of her fictionalized history takes place around 1874. The Ingalls family moves from Kansas to an area near Walnut Grove, Minnesota, and they settled in a dugout on the banks of Plum Creek, and then they moved there from Wisconsin when she was about 7 years old, after briefly living with the family of her uncle Peter in Wisconsin, and then rented land near Lake City, Minnesota. In Walnut Grove, the family first lived in a dugout and a sod house in a preemption claim. After wintering in it, they moved into a new house built on the same land her father built, Charles built. 2 summers of ruined crops led them to move back down to Iowa, and on the way they stayed again with Charles' brother Peter, this time on his farm near South Troy, Minnesota. Her brother Charles Frederick Ingalls, Freddie, was born there on November 1st, 1875. He died 9 months later in August 1876 in Burr Oak, Iowa. The family helped run a motel for a little while to pick up some money, and the youngest of the Ingalls children, Grace, was born there on May 23rd, 1877. And DeSmit, the Charles Charles filed for a formal homestead over the winter of 1879-1880 in DeSmit, South Dakota, and that became home for them and her blind sister Mary for pretty much the remainder of her lives. Her sister Mary went blind because of complications with scarlet fever. It took her vision and such. And then after spending the mild winter of 1879 and 1880 in the surveyor's house, they watched the town of DeSmit rise up from the prairie in 1880. The following winter in 1881, one of the most severe winters on record in the Dakotas, lost my place. The family settled in DeSmit, and she attended school and worked several part-time jobs. She helped a seamstress, and she cleaned house for a family, and stuff like that. And friends, and Ingalls attended school, and she met her husband, which was also her classmate, but he was a bachelor homesteader later on. This time, her life is documented in the books Little Town on the Prairie, that talks about her life in DeSmet and these happy golden years after she got married in 1934, or 1943, sorry. When she was 2 months before her 16th birthday on December 10th, 1882, she accepted her first teaching position. She taught 3 terms in a one-room schoolhouse when she was not attending school in DeSmet. But her original 3rd grade teaching certificate can be seen on page 25 of the William Anderson's book in Laura's album. She later admittedly said she did not particularly enjoy teaching, but she felt a responsibility from a young age to help her family financially, and she enjoyed the wage earning opportunities. But the opportunities back then for women were limited. They were a school teacher, or they cleaned house, or they were at home helping their mother. Between 1883 and 1885, she taught 3 terms of school and worked for a local dressmaker, as well as finished high school, and she ended up not actually graduating though. This was due to her 3rd and final teaching job starting before her schooling even finished. Her teaching career and studies ended when she married Almanzo Wilder on August 25th, 1885, in DeSmet, South Dakota. From the beginning of their relationship, the pair had nicknames for each other. She called him Manly, and he called her Bess, from her middle name Elizabeth, to avoid confusion with his sister, who was also named Laura. Almanzo had achieved a degree of prosperity on his homestead claim, and the newly married couple started their life together in their new home north of DeSmet. On December 5th, 1886, Wilder gave birth to her daughter Rose, and in 1889 she gave birth to a son who died at 12 days of age before being named. He was buried in DeSmet, Kingsbury County, South Dakota. On the grave marker, he is remembered as baby son of A.J. Wilder. Their first few years of marriage were difficult, with complications from life-threatening diphtheria in 1888 that left Almanzo completely or partially paralyzed. He eventually regained full nearly use of his legs and his arms and his hands, but he needed a cane to walk for the remainder of his life. This setback, among many others, began a series of unfortunate events that included the death of their newborn son, the destruction of their barn along with the hay and grain by a mysterious fire, and total loss of their home by a fire accidentally set by Rose. And several years of severe drought left them in debt, physically ill, and unable to earn a living for their 320 acres of prairie land. These trials were documented in Wilder's book, The First 4 Years, published in 1971. And around 1890, they left DeSmet and spent a year resting in the home of Almanzo's parents in Spring Valley, Minnesota, before they briefly moved to Westville, Florida, in search of climate improvement to try to improve Almanzo's health, because he was always sick and kind of trying to cure what he had. They found that, however, that the dry plains were used to were very different from the humidity they encountered in Westville, and the weather, along with feeling out of place among the locals in Florida. They encouraged their return to DeSmet in 1892, and they purchased a small home. They later moved to Mansfield, Missouri in 1894, and they used their savings to make a down payment on an undeveloped property just outside of town. They named the place Rocky Ridge Farm, and they moved to a ramshackle log cabin. At first, they earned income only from wagon loads of firewood that they would sell in town for 50 cents. And then they slowly but surely gained financial security. They planted apple trees, but they did not bear fruit for 7 years. And Almanzo's parents visited around that time and gave them the deed to the house that they had been renting in Mansfield, which was an economic boost that the Wilder family needed. Then they added to the property outside of town, which eventually accrued nearly 200 acres. And around 1910, they sold the house in town and they moved back to the farm and completed the farmhouse with the proceeds that they got from their apple trees and selling firewood. What began as 40 acres of thickly wooded, stone-covered hillside and a widowless log cabin became 20 years of relatively prosperous poultry, dairy, and fruit farm in a 10-room farmhouse, which was relatively big for the time. And they learned from cultivating wheat as their sole crop in DeSmet. They diversified Rocky Ridge Farm with poultry, a dairy farm, and a large apple orchard. They became active in various clubs and advocated for several regional farm associations. Laura was recognized as an authority in poultry farming and rural living, which led to invitation to speak to groups around the region. Laura's writing career, an invitation to submit an article to the Missouri Ruralist in 1911 led to Wilder's permanent position as a columnist and editor with that publication, which she held in the mid-1920s. She also took a paid position with the local Farm Loan Association, dispensing small loans to local farmers. Wilder's column in the Ruralist, As a Farm Woman Thinks, introduced her to the loyal audience of rural Ozarkians who enjoyed her regular columns. Her topics range from home and family, including her 1915 trip to San Francisco, California, to visit her now-married daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, to see the Pan-Pacific exhibition, to World War I, and other world events, and the fascinating world travels of Lane, as well as her own thoughts in increasing options offered to women during this era. While the couple were never wealthy until the Little House books began to achieve popularity, the farming operation and Wilder's income from writing and the Farm Loan Association provided them with a stable living. By 1924, according to the professor John E. Miller, after more than a decade of writing for farm papers, Wilder had become a very disciplined writer, and she was able to produce a thoughtful, readable prose for a general audience. Around this time, Wilder's daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, she began intensively encouraging her mother to improve her writing skills with a view toward greater success as a writer than Lane had already achieved. The Wilders, according to Miller, had become too dependent on annual income subsidies subsidies from their increasingly famous and successful daughter. They both concluded that the solution for improving their retirement income was for her, Laura, to become a successful writer. As a start, Rose helped Laura publish 2 articles describing the interior of her farmhouse to the Country Gentleman magazine. However, that never proceeded very far, and in 1928, she hired out the construction of an English-style stone cottage for her parents' property adjacent to the farmhouse that they had personally built and still inhabited, and she remodeled it and took it over. In 1830, Laura requested her daughter's opinion on an autobiographical manuscript she had written about her pioneering childhood. The Great Depression, coupled with the deaths of Wilder's mother in 1924 and her older sister in 1928, seemed to have prompted her to preserve her memories in a life story called Pioneer Girl. She also hoped that her writing would generate some additional income to help with retirement funds. And she lived her life writing books and publishing with Harper and Brothers, and she continued doing that until she passed away.